So again, hello everybody. It's so lovely that you joined us tonight on what was essentially a little short notice, but this is actually going to be a really exciting conversation. Sarah and I have been working on this for a while, and it's going to be really cool. So my name is Neil Daigle Orians. I am the visual arts manager at Real Artways. I am in charge of our visual arts programming and doing all sorts of fun stuff. With us tonight is Sarah Fritchey, who is the curator of an exhibition we are opening in October called Shadows. Wow, statues. Statues also die. Shadows die too, apparently. Statues also die. And she can talk, and she will talk a little bit more about that exhibition, how it ties into this open call that we are putting out there, as well as Constanza Segovia, who is the designer, brainchild, wonderful human being behind Veo Veo Design. And Dana Miranda is also joining us, hopefully giving us some wisdom and insight from his field as a philosopher teaching at UMass Boston, whose research is very much so investigating statues and monuments and their role in a cultural setting. So that's my 5 minutes. I'm going to start off the meeting with a very quick little PowerPoint presentation that I made, and it just kind of contextualizes. I chose like 4 random projects from Real Artways history. Real Artways, we are a 45-year-old arts organization, contemporary arts organization in Hartford, Connecticut. And in those 45 years, we produced more than 35 public art projects, varying in scope, varying in media, and varying in both temporary as well as permanent. Sometimes permanent unintentionally, as I'll show you in a little bit. So let me just show you my beautiful, beautiful PowerPoint. Look at her. Yay. Cute, right? Right. So the first project I'm going to show you is one of our oldest projects from 1991. This is an artist named Mel Chin who recently received a MacArthur Genius Grant. And Mel worked with us on this project. And what it is it's an evocation of the Talcott Street Church, which was the very first free Black church in Connecticut. And it is standing on where it once stood in Hartford. So you can kind of see he made it out of this scrim material with chalk drawing on it. And the title Ghost, definitely implying a supernatural sense. But during this project, he worked with Faith Congregational Church, which is the descendant church of the original Talcott Street Church. And they last year actually just celebrated their 200th anniversary. I saw Jasmine Augusto earlier on the call, and hopefully she's still here with us. We worked together on that in varying roles, and she's a lovely human as well. So this is one of our oldest projects, and you can see how from the inside, you could see very clearly the outside. The rubble that you see making up the staircase was taken from other buildings in the area that were torn down for urban renewal projects. And ultimately, the Talcott Street Church was torn down in the late 1800s. I might be making that up. It was torn down, no, 1950s, right? I don't know. It was a long time ago.
1950s.
Thank you, Jasmine. Hartford historian. So it was torn down and in this urban renewal project. So Mel at the time was really interested in how there are these projects that are supposedly improving urban spaces when in reality they're actually creating what are now empty garages. So he took rubble from these from other buildings in the area that were torn down and created the staircase that led in and out of the evocation of the church. The next project I want to show is Carl Pope Jr., a project titled Silent Wishes, Unconscious Dreams and Prayers Fulfilled. This installation view is where it currently lives, which is at Church of the Good Shepherd on 155 Willis Street. But it was originally installed in 1996 in a vacant lot on at 128 Albany Avenue. So what they are brownstone slabs that are then carved with quotes and recollections of surrounding 11 city youth who had died in recent years at the time of the creation. Some of them were victims of domestic violence or gang violence. Some of them were victims of HIV and AIDS. But the whole project was about memorializing these young lives that were taken from various from various problems that were going kind of unspoken about, at least in Hartford at the time. So from those two very touching ones, we have kind of a silly one. At least I think it's silly. This is a mural of the Charter Oak, Connecticut's favorite tree. I forgot to write down the address of where this is, but it is on one of the oldest, not the oldest, but one of the oldest former synagogues in Hartford. And this piece is actually made by Adam Nikolowitz. It's made so that it's actually a sealant on the brick, and then anywhere where the sealant isn't is where the tree actually shows up when it rains. So you can see there are sprinklers at the bottom for the opening event, but now it actually only shows up when it's wet, when the brick absorbs that water. And it's this interesting kind of use of state iconography, something that a lot of people in Connecticut are extremely familiar with. Whether or not the Charter Oak was actually had its mythic importance of being the tree that held the state, the royal decree, it really doesn't matter. It's a tree. And there's something interesting about it existing on this wall. But more compelling, well, first of all, it's based off of this painting, which is in the Wadsworth Athenaeum's collection, and it's a collaboration between our two organizations. But more interesting, I actually want to present a different project from 2017 called Street Ghosts by an artist named Paulo Sirio. And in the background, you can actually see we were lucky enough when we documented that it was a rainy day, so the tree was actually visible that day. But Street Ghosts is this project that we did with Paulo Sirio in conjunction with a larger exhibition about surveillance. And what he does is he goes on Google Street View and looks for the screenshots that Google takes of various streets and finds people who are captured. And what Google does is they automatically blur faces, and that's how they essentially get away with surveillance. It's essentially how they get away with taking people's pictures without their permission and posting it on the website. So what he does is he finds these images and then using some really complicated math, actually, he blows them up to as close to life size as possible, as if they did exist, and then we paste them on the spot that they were originally captured. So this guy right here was captured by the Google Street View van waiting for a bus, and we placed him on that bus stop. And we had in that project we had 7 locations around Hartford, and they kind of lasted in very different time frames. One was taken down the night we put it up, and others lasted until months after the exhibition. So then the last piece I have, I just really quickly wanted to show. Yes, I'm not going over time. This is Sophia Maldonado. This is a mural that sits above Pelican Tattoo in the Frog Hollow neighborhood in Hartford. And when I was just looking this up, this was a project I knew I wanted to talk about visually. But when I was looking up, I found this really great quote from her from a story from 2009 when she installed it. She said, "The wooden cutout female characters all have long nails, so I took them to the nail salon before installation. This was a fun part of the project. The ladies decorated my Latina characters with long, fancy nails, tattoos, and rhinestones. It was a beautiful community collaboration because I got to incorporate the nail art culture into my mural. I love recognizing the local art of the communities I work in." And ultimately, that's one of the things that Real Artways tries to do. That we, whenever we bring in these artists to do these public art projects, we want to tie them into the community. And it's part of the reason why this project means so much to me and means so much to Real Artways. It's really continuing this mission that we've had for decades now, of exploring innovative works and incorporating the community in the work that we do. I also have this really great picture of her outside of her. For scale, I guess. It's huge and it's still there. You can still see it. And I also read that when they were going to do the project originally, They were going to paint the actual face of the wall, but then it had recently got historic significance placed on it by the city. So they had to think quickly, and eventually the idea of making plywood cutouts came about. And so literally the day she arrived in Hartford to begin working on this project, she had to completely reconfigure it and completely redo the concept. So that's all I got. Hey, thanks. When I teach, I actually use okay, bye. But today it was hey, thanks. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Sarah. She's going to talk about the open call and kind of contextualize it within the exhibition that she has curated. So hopefully, Sarah, when you hit share screen, it all works out. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed. All right, here we go. Share screen. PowerPoint presentation.
Hey, yo.
Is it doing it? And is it showing notes at the bottom that only I should be viewing?
It is. So see if you can hit slideshow and hit play or something like that.
Yeah. Okay.
Hey, yo.
Hold on one second. I'm so sorry. Presenter view. Okay, what are you seeing?
We're seeing exactly what you're seeing.
You know what?
It's okay if we see your notes.
Yeah, it's okay because I'm just gonna talk anyway, and they're basically just image credits. So it'll help us give each of these images, which I feel like for the most part are kind of burned into the group's collective imagination right now, because the exhibition, which is coming to Real Artways, as Neil said, from October 25th to January 21st, is thinking about this recent movement of monument removal that we've all been a part of, whether we've been outside asking for the removal or protesting for the removal, or physically in a forklift removing a statue on behalf of our municipality, or sitting in a seat of government, deciding if a statue removal needs to go through the court system. We've all been a part of this process. And this process is one that is happening right now because of the value that monuments hold. And you know, this exhibition that is coming to Real Artways is really thinking about how do monuments, which are seen as sort of objects that are forever lasting and representation of different heroicized individuals. I'm talking specifically in this context about figurative monuments that are of lone people. Represent different stories, or we could say different histories, or we could say different mythologies. And part of the statue removal that we see around the world is a collective reckoning with a lot of histories that we are realizing are actual lies, either full or partial lies. And as protesters who are thinking and looking more closely at history and the way that our histories have been written into our textbooks, are recognizing that it's been written from the perspective of our colonizers, from people in power, are calling for a rewriting of that through education, but also policy and how it's impacting us differently. Are holders of these stories, and that they are not just holders of heritage or holders of a sort of narrative of cultural significance. They are expressions of power and also violence that is race-based and really need our attention. So the first image that you see are Black Lives Matter protesters that are in Bristol, and they're pulling down a statue of an enslaver named Edward Colston, so forcibly removing it and tossing it into the harbor. Another image that you might recognize is from Monument Avenue in Virginia. This is another enslaver, J.E.B. Stewart, and it was removed. This is a picture of Silent Sam that was toppled by students who are at the University of North Carolina. It's another Confederate statue. And then this is a statue that is still actually remains, and recently was ordered by a judge to wait until 90 days after the city asked for its removal for that case to go through court. And it has been a place where protesters have gathered and written their own messages over the monument to Lee, and also used these projections and also used it as a site of vigil and a space of gathering for protest. This movement is something that hasn't just started in 2020. Protesters have been protesting monuments to our colonizers and Confederates soldiers for decades. Even recently in 2017, after the clash in Charlottesville, where the extreme right protesters ran over a Black Lives Matter protester taking her life, resulted in the removal of 4 monuments that were in New Orleans. This is one of them. It's again of the Confederate general, Richard Lee. And this 2017 moment gave life to the creation of a project that I'll talk a little bit about in a few minutes, that was started by a collective of designers, architects, civic engineers, who were thinking really critically about public space and asked the mayor of New Orleans the question, well, if these 4 Confederate monuments are being taken down, what is going to take their place? So it was a moment when the figures were removed from the tops of these plinths, and the empty pedestals kind of begged the question of everyone that was passing by that was a resident in New Orleans, who is part of this decision process? And also, if we erect a new monument, do we erect a monument to a figure? And is it a lone figure, or is it a statuary of multiple figures? And also, how could a lone figure represent our collective identities? And this group of thinkers, who are named Paper Monuments, created a platform for people around New Orleans to write in their responses, to imagine the name of a monument, where it might reside, what story it would tell. And they were really after what this open call for the exhibition at Real Art Space is after, in terms of the open call, providing a open, porous space for storytelling. And I think critical thinking around what we want from a monument, why we need it, why monuments have been created in the first place. And in terms of looking at the sites where monuments have been removed, the show wants to look specifically at Connecticut to think about the context in which those statues were erected, where the funding came from, the protest movements that were organized to have them removed, and how we as residents can be part of the decision-making process, and what new form of monument might be replaced in our hometowns, giving us agency in that decision. I added these 7 slides of cities around Connecticut, the state of Connecticut, where monuments have already been removed. The first one, I'm going to do this in chronological order because I think it's actually interesting that if you told me there was a monument removal movement coming to Connecticut, I would immediately think Hartford or New Haven, because they have a strong university presence, might be the first 2 to jump on board and remove their monuments. And instead, Middletown, Connecticut, actually, again, a university presence because Wesleyan is there, was the first Connecticut city to remove a monument to Columbus. Soon thereafter, New London, Connecticut followed. And both of these monuments had already been vandalized in the past, you've seen pictures of red paint thrown over top of the statue to symbolize the genocide, displacement, and violence that Columbus inflicted upon entire generations of peoples. This is then following with New Haven, and actually New Haven and Norwich, Connecticut removed their monuments to Columbus on the same day. In Norwich, there wasn't a lone figure statuary. The face of Columbus was etched as a relief into the side of this monolith. So they just actually rubbed down the relief into the smooth surface of the monolith and the engravings that recognized Columbus's name. Following that, Norwalk removed their monument to Columbus. And as you can see, this is a picture in the middle of the night. Another thing that is interesting to consider when we're talking about when these monuments are being removed is time of day. Some are highly publicized, some are being organized around protest and making it be a safe space of protest, hopefully. Others, when a monument is moved at night, are kind of indicative of the state's concern that the removal could end up in protest or violence, and wanting to do something as a sort of mechanism for doing something quickly and without friction and maybe without press. So in a lot of these articles that you read where the monuments are being removed at night, you'll have one reporter saying, hey, I was luckily passing by on my commute to work and saw that it was 7 a.m. in the morning and stopped by, and I got to interview one person who was a jogger on the street walking by to see what they thought. So it's interesting to see, again, with this sort of process, when residents are being included or not being included in the conversation around what's going in their backyard, and also when protesters who are being listened to are being included or not included in this protest.
Hey, Sarah, just real quick, just a time check. Yeah. It's 6:25, just so you know.
I'm gonna just run. This is Hartford, Connecticut. And this is Bridgeport. Statues that are still standing around Connecticut that are Columbus statues are in Waterbury, Stamford, Torrington, New Britain, Southington, and Meriden. So out of the 13 total, 6 are still standing. And a lot of these also have petitions around them that are online that you can sign up to be a part of. The Columbus Monument in Stamford is being actively protested against. It has become a place to leave notes. It's a place of memorialization, I would say, which is really interesting when we start thinking about what a monument is, and how someone can be commemorated and how it can change its nature as site. And for the open call, the context in which this show is being presented is really one that is within an arts context. I know we have Dana, Miranda, and Jasmine Augusto on the call. Both of them are historians and philosophers, so they're probably coming from a deeper historic context than I am. But for me, historically, I'm really interested in thinking about when we talk about what could replace these removed statuary figures, what different forms could that are sort of changing the paradigm of monumentality and everlasting statuary as we know it. What could they look like? So one of the first contexts that I just wanted to share with the group is coming out of World War II. Architects, designers, artists came together to recognize that in the rebuilding of a bombed out Europe, there was room to actually, instead of focusing building on victory arches and statuary monuments and monoliths, because there was so much infrastructure that was needed, there's a building project around creating practical spaces like schools, libraries, highways that would be named after someone else. So it was a sort of a living, the term that was used was a living monument, and it was born out of World War II. The other concept that was born, sorry about that, is called a counter monument. And a counter monument looked really critically at at itself. This is an example that was built in Kassel, Germany, when an artist was invited to reconstruct a fountain that the Nazis had demolished when they had taken over the town. And instead of working from the archive photograph of the design of the fountain, they decided to invert it and put it into the ground. So the image that you see on the left is the original before it was destroyed. And then the image on the right, the entire thing was rebuilt and then inserted. And you can look sort of at your reflection in these pools of water that gather through the grates in the top of this fountain. So you're looking critically at yourself and your reason for being here. Another example of a counter monument that was created post-World War II is this monolith that anyone who passed by was invited to take a writing utensil and engrave their name in and write the name of someone who they lost or wanted to memorialize. This piece started out as like a 3-story high monolith, and every year it was slowly lowered into the ground until it ceased to exist. So this is an example of a counter monument that was designed to disappear. I just wanted to point out that within a sort of art context, there are tons of artists who are being very critical of monuments in their work. In 1991, this is a piece that David Hammons made, which shows the Roosevelt Monument that sits outside of the Natural History Museum in New York City. I think all of us know that that has also been a monument that has been under great contestation. The museum, a year and a half back, made an entire exhibition called Addressing the Statue that wanted to write it in contemporary light, new context into the race-based inequities and violence that the statue evoked. And then because of recent protest efforts, those historians that worked on this project realized that this exhibition was not enough, that it was a symbol and it wasn't actually doing anything to move history forward and to think about the way that we consistently need to call ourselves to reconstruct narratives of history that could be bound to mythologies based in different forms of power and imbalance and violence. So that now the museum asked the city for permission to remove the monument, and the city said yes, so that is going to be removed. One of the artists in the exhibition that if you visit Real Artways you'll see is Doreen Garner, who cast the skin of this statue to the right of J. Marion Sims, who's the grandfather of gynecology, who learned and was very honored for techniques to end female incontinence after childbirth by testing out and experimenting on 4 women who he had enslaved. So she recast his body and then dissected it and hangs it on these butcher blocks in the space. There's other artists who are thinking about how do we make a monument collectively? And I think this is really where I start to think about, and Neil frames his face, think about the meaning of this show and the meaning of this open call. You know, the lone monument represents a sort of impossible bind. How can we all find representation in one figure, and what might a monument to many people look like? This is a piece made by an artist named Castles, who was invited by a local art center in Omaha to make a monument to the LGBTQI+ community. And this is a bronze cast of a large clay piece that the artist punched into physically with their own body. It's 1,900 pounds, and different members of the community pushed it around collectively from site to sites to recognize LGBTQI+ strength and transformation and resilience. And so that will also be in the show. This is another monument that I would argue is collectively made. It's by Nick Cave, who you might know for his sound suits. He was invited again by another arts organization, Now and There, to work with the community to create a representation of joy. he, over the course of 6 months, did collage workshops where individuals made drawings that were then blown up by him and his studio assistant, plastered on the outside of a brick building. And then this inflatable piece, which you see, was installed inside of the building, and it was on display for a year. And it happened to overlap with the coronavirus pandemic. So it was actually a really interesting way to think about building as monument. And it remained up for 6 more months than it was supposed to. So an element of this inflatable sculpture will be in the show at Art Space as well. And so I think, the open call is really about the question that this image that you're looking at now by Paul Jonas Ramirez, who's also in the show, is asking, how do we write the face of monuments? Whose space is it to tell their stories? How do we collectively tell our stories? How can it be transitive? How can we think of monument making as being ephemeral? How can we think monument making as being more akin to life and sustenance and survival? So we landed on, we recreate this wonderful project that the New Orleans collective called Paper Monuments brought to the city of New Orleans in 2017 after the 4 Confederate monuments there were removed. Paper Monuments gave us their blessing to rethink what the open call might be, and to bring the question of what the open call should be actually to our Connecticut audiences. So right now we're at phase 1 in a project that might travel, might have different institutional hosts, might partner with different communities, but rather than just located in one city, we've located this open call for proposals to imagine a new monument for your hometown in Connecticut. And we're really inspired by these community-centered, collective-based ways of thinking. We're also inspired by paradigm shifts. So answers to this open call don't necessarily need to be rooted in a very formal retelling of a history that could be untold or unknown or partially or fully erased. They could have a sense of humor. They could be really conceptual. They could desire something that's completely impossible, like free education and free healthcare for all. So it's a place to really be an open writing pad for collective desire right now. And to also think about, if you were so moved to cite, and how this project could be grounded in your hometown, and really connect with the outdoors and the way we rely on Mother Earth. So that is the quick spiel that I have. I'm gonna pass over the mic to Constanza, who's gonna tell us a little bit about the open call and what we need to do to apply. And I just wanted to preface this with the fact that Constanza is coming to us through Veo Veo Design Studio with an incredible set of graphic design skills, and that whatever submissions are submitted, she has created a template for transforming those into 19 by 13 inch posters that will have life within the exhibition at Real Artways. Will have life within this catalog that we're collecting of all the data sets of all the proposals, and could potentially have life outside in the sites that the monuments are being proposed for. So, Constanza.
Yay, thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm very excited to be involved, and I thought, one of the big things that I like to do is make these type of things accessible beyond the art world. I think one of the greatest values of art is, the ability to reflect and imagine that it gives us, all, not just the artist creating, right? So I thought I would do a demo on how to submit and, give you an example of what an idea could look like. But also not meant to limit at all what people should do or think. I think Sarah's examples, all of the amazing work that Neil shared at the beginning, like that should really hopefully expand your thinking. And also I really encourage people to do things that like they've never seen before. That's really kind of the magic of all this. And I think in our society, we need more and more opportunities to imagine new things. We desperately need that. So I'm gonna share my screen. Let's see if this works. Safari, okay. You can see the Real Art Ways website. Okay, you can hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, so you go to the Real Art Ways website. We'll share the link. Maybe someone can post it in the chat, or you know, whatever is like a good way to share that with people watching this video after. We'll make sure to post it all over social media and send emails. You know, we'll definitely, the link will be out there. So this is a special page where you go do your submission. It has, you know, all of the details. It has the information of today's info session that will be updated to be a link to the recording. And then, you know, you can read about, you know, the thinking, you know, the why and the how. There's links to Monument Lab and Paper Monuments, which are, you know, the projects that existed before and our inspiration. You can even see one of the Paper Monuments examples, so you can kind of envision what we're aiming to do. So that's someone's drawing into a templated poster. And that's what we'll do with everybody's designs in Connecticut. So then you keep scrolling, and also actually very important, Neil's contact information for any questions, thoughts, concerns, ideas, you know, anything, just email Neil. And then we have the call for entry. So I already have it filled in, but you put in your name, you know, Constanza, Segovia, your email, you title your monument. It doesn't, you know, it can be as poetic or as simple as you want. Mine is called Police Free Zone. The town, the Connecticut town or site of my proposal is in Hartford. The type of monument, this is a really fun thing actually to think about ahead of time. Is it roving? Is it temporary? Is it permanent? I want mine to be permanent because I want it to be something that grows with time. And then the brief story of your document. And we definitely want this to be brief. I actually wrote something ahead of time, so I'll paste that here. And what I want to do is show you what, sorry. So this monument represents our need to abolish the police and completely rethink and redefine safety. We're asking that people do 2 to 3 sentences. So after learning that the cops who killed Breonna Taylor will not be charged with murder, I'm trying to lean into imagining a world or a space where she wouldn't have been killed. So my monument would be an important oasis in Hartford specifically because public spaces are over-policed in predominantly Black and brown cities like Hartford. And I hope its open walls allow it to spread and grow. I purposely did a very quick rendering because I don't want anybody to think that you have to be an artist or any type of like visual communicator. I mean, so just let go of your hangups because we are all visual communicators. And please share in any way. We've been talking about how, so I have my monument, and actually, I don't know if it's going to show a preview or maybe I can switch. I mean, I'll make sure to show you what I'm sending. Also, this is a demo, so we can remove the submission. I don't want to take up a spot of someone. Okay, so it's not showing a preview, but preview your entry. Okay, so I clicked preview your entry, and I have a chance to go back to make corrections if I want to or not. Click to send your entry. Please wait. Ta-da! Thank you. So there, now my submission is now part of the show and part of the zine that will put together, a digital publication that will collect all of the submissions. The plan is to do an exhibit, to showcase the first 100. And also, like Sarah said, this is phase 1, right? So like we want to make sure to extend this and keep it going, and have conversations about the value of this. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and then start again to show you the drawing, because I might as well, since we're here. And I know probably there isn't much time, but let's see, share. So that's my monument.
Oh.
And it is, so I referenced the open walls. I want it to be a space that is completely open and has like gardens on the side so that it can continue to grow. Anybody can come in and anybody can leave at any time, but loud music can be played. Cops are not allowed. There's free Wi-Fi, there's free snacks, there's pets that you can pet, sit around. There's a tree, growth and hope. So that is my submission. But I definitely encourage everybody to do different things. I'm seeing the comments, but I think it's really important to just use whatever tools you have. If someone's more comfortable with collage, we talked about using our phones. A lot of people, like, I find that very intimidating, but if someone wants to like take pictures and put something together like that, truly no limits. Like whatever you can put into a JPEG that you can upload, that's it. That's the guidelines, and give us 2 or 3 sentences to tell us what you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you for putting that together on pretty short notice too. We did not give you much time to put that together, but it was actually a really thoughtful submission example. So thank you. So at this point, we'd like to open it up to kind of like a dialogue. Like we've been saying over and over again, this is very much so a work in progress. And so I'm very interested in kind of hearing some thoughts on this project, and if you have any questions for clarification or anything like that, that you'd like for us to think about in the future as we go forward. So now is a good time to ask questions and whatnot. You don't have to raise your hand, just start talking.
Hi, my name's Nathaniel Herman. I was born in Hartford, Connecticut back in '76. I've recently returned to Connecticut after 20 years. And I saw on the news the other day that statue submissions were coming out, and I gained a lot of interest in this. I've been a working artist for 20 plus years, and I wanted to join tonight to see who was qualified to participate in this event. So maybe you can help me out with understanding if someone like myself is qualified.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think Sarah could probably field this question. This is her brainchild in terms of the democratizing of it, but absolutely, yes.
So I think, like Constanza said, we're really interested in having this be it's an unjuried, democratic, in whatever sense you want to take that word in, open call. Its strength is in just the number of proposals that we get, because in the more feedback we receive, the more we'll see how different people are really understanding their relationship to a sense of a collective self, a sense of relationship to public space, how, you know, monuments create city centers, whether we think about it like that or not. And maybe your monument is something that creates multiple city centers and it's in 8 parts around your town. We also want this to be a place of people feeling like they have agency and room to speak about their needs and desires. And through our institutional relationships and networks, we're already sort of putting out feelers to let municipalities and people that are parts of arts councils know we're doing this open call and we're going to have this zine. So it's this thing that can be distributed. So I would say anyone is invited to participate. Constanza was extremely you know, a motivator early on in our conversations about making sure that the open call was legible and inviting to young people and older people. So, you know, from youth that are 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 to seniors, we are really interested in getting a range of experiences. I'd also say that you can apply as an individual and you can also apply as a collective. So if you are part of a group of thinkers, either your workforce, your family, what sports are being played right now. There's no sports during COVID that are being played. Your online team, I don't know, whatever your team could be, you know, collective thinking, individual thinking. This is a time of just imagining big and recognizing all of the strengths that is in a set of shared experiences that are different and expressing themselves in different ways. And also the opportunity to see when there are real points of connection. So maybe you're proposing a monument for Hartford that 7 other people out of the 50 applicants are proposing. So it becomes a real case to think critically about, like, how do we manifest this in a way? How do we speak to these gaps?
That's actually brings me to something that I wanted to take advantage that Dana Miranda is with us and give him a question specifically, if you don't mind, Dana, because I've been thinking a lot about the power embedded in this act of designing a monument, right? And like who has had that power. I loved the examples that you gave, Sarah, that so many I wasn't familiar with. But I just would love to hear more, you know, about like, what do you think, you know, what's the thing about like having agency, you know, on like what exists in our public space and like continues to exist in our historical physical environment?
So thank you for the question. And for myself and my studies on monuments and history, or the philosophy of history, it's specifically that connection with the public. Monuments are always public or typically or primarily public facing objects. And so for me, if you're just taking the Latin root of the word monument, monere, it's to remind you or to remind us. And so monuments are being placed down because they're reminders of certain histories, events, figures, or structures that are supposed to be pertinent to our collective, our community, our histories, our living. And I'm using multiple terms that have different connotations because, again, each monument can mean something to different groups of people, to individuals, or are there differences between official narratives by the government versus what the community actually believes? And so for me, even if we're talking about the typical monument of just that solitary figure. So we saw Lee, we saw Columbus, there's George Washington. Again, we've seen many of these same statues. Even those monuments, the reason why they're significant, at least in my own work, is because they give us narratives. They're literally stories set in stone, but rather than having one singular storyteller, or in the African tradition, a griot, you're actually having generations returning to that public-facing concrete object and really saying, what is this narrative? What is it saying to me, and how am I relating to it? And so the process of a monument, even though it's recalling a history, it's recalling a history to the living that will always interpret that call differently. And so before the call talked, I was talking to Neil briefly, and then I'll allow more space for more questions and for more conversation. I was telling him, like, I'm in Boston, but I went to grad school at UConn. And I did a lot of public dialogues in the Hartford area called Encounters. So I had a lot of conversations with people. I still work with them. But in Boston, now that I'm back home, it's about, well, what are the monuments I'm surrounded with in the Boston area? And so I was talking to Neil about, has anyone heard about the Bunker Hill Monument? And wherever I go outside of Boston, most people are like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So I was like, do you know the George Washington Monument in DC? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, basically that, but smaller. And so I'm like, you have that visual representation of a white obelisk, but you don't actually have a narrative or a history or a meaning behind it. But if you look at the historical narrative, if you go right after the Revolutionary War, you had figures like George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, saying this is one of the most important national monuments because it's the first place that their blood was shed, that Americans died for the idea of the country. Or if you go to the Civil War, it was a meeting point for the whole nation to reconcile the North and South, to say that we're going to a place where the first Americans shed their blood to reunite the country. So at different points, it's called the Mecca of America. It was supposed to be the Mecca, the main monument for the United States. You even had Lafayette, who was the French figure in the Revolutionary War, had soil from that site on his casket when he died. That's how important it was for Lafayette, George Washington, General Grant during the Civil War. But now if I ask people again, who knows about the Bunker Hill Monument, the Mecca of America, outside of Boston, you're like, I have no idea the significance. And so the narrative and meaning have changed, have been lost in time, even though the monument remains the same. It hasn't changed. And so as we are rethinking about creating new monuments, the difference is, it's about keeping that in mind. Like, what narratives do we actually want to construct? What ways do we want to change those public spaces? And for me, I love this project because you see the creativity of people living and engaging with active history. So I'm more than happy to hear more, answer any questions you have about monuments, but I'm just excited for this project. It's a great project.
I loved some of the examples that were shown where the monument was defaced and then that has become, like talking, like going off of this idea of like it becomes something else with time. I love that. And I don't know if anybody has any thoughts about that or like, like are there, and I'm just so amazed by people constantly and there's so little that I know. Like I feel like there must be someone out there who has designed a monument that accounts for that evolution. I mean, like the ones that were like the monolith that with time went into the ground, like, that's amazing. I love that.
A monument to defaced monuments.
Yes.
I mean, I would say that just speaking from an art historical standpoint, the movement against modernism, postmodernism, is really about embracing the anti-form, embracing, the idea that history and a storyline and a narrative is superficially articulated as one linear thing, one trajectory that is called the master narrative. And postmodernism wants to say, whoa. Along this line, there have been many other ignored histories and activities and events that have been reconstructed via the master narrative. So arguably, I could name a million different artworks that are, responding to the tradition of modernism, which at its end is minimalism. It's just those steely public artworks that give you nothing, but they address space and they occupy space. And then, postmodernism and the anti-form movement, which is relates to a space of activism. It's coming out of, the 60s, civil rights era protest, says, no, I'm not forever, I'm impermanent. And the birth of like performance art really takes up space, because if you're performing something, it's ephemeral, you can't capture it, it goes away. So yeah, I don't know, I guess in that that space of rewriting what a monument is, there could be more examples of people who have treated their bodies like monuments. There's this really great example in the Sydney Biennial right now of an Alaskan indigenous artist who etched into the soil the outline of George Washington monument on a plinth, and it's treated as an excavation site, so that it's simultaneously this place of the shadow of George Washington, but also excavation. So all of these sort of like forms of how we write history from the perspective of a colonizer are just baked into that really intense earthwork. And it's a rewriting of an earthwork too. So it claims a lot of space, but
So really quickly, in the chat function, I posted a link to the submissions for more information. I also want to be respectful of everybody's time, knowing that we have only a few minutes left, and that if there is any other comments or questions, to speak now. But also my email is on that website, and I'm happy to field any questions.
I would say one more example, Janine Antoni cast all of these amazing busts instead out of plaster or marble, out of like butter and chocolate, which she would like actually lick. So all of these things again are
lick and lather,
designed to go away. Yeah. But Dana, I'm just so excited to have met you and to think a lot about what you just said, you know, the need to revisit the context in which these monuments are being made through primary source documents, and the energies around them, and that is what is the motivation for these open call proposals.
And on top of that, while we're naming names, Nathaniel, I hope you feel welcome to submit to this. We're trying to get, I'm personally excited to see not only non-artists, but also artists. I'm really excited to see what artists make of this call. In addition to non-artists who feeling welcome and feeling included, I'm really excited to see what artists do as well. So with that,
can I make a statement?
Sure.
So I was born and raised in Connecticut. I was born in Hartford, 1976, and in '95, I went to art school in Montserrat in Beverly, Massachusetts, and eventually transferred out to Oregon because I wanted to go find the West Coast and see what the difference was. And eventually that drove me overseas. I just returned home to the United States after 8 years overseas, living in Thailand, Japan, Hong Kong, Shanghai, working as an artist for Walt Disney Imagineering on projects like Pirates of the Caribbean, Cars Land. Being home has been wonderful. And when I saw these monuments coming down justifiably, I wanted to be involved with this as an artist, as a New Englander, and this is what led me to finding your team in Hartford. I was so happy to find this today, and I hope I can be involved with this in the future because it's important, it's real, and to me, it's blood. So I'm just happy to meet everyone tonight, and wherever it goes, it is where it goes. But it was nice to meet everybody tonight, and I hope I can be involved with it in the future because it's so nice to be home after so much time away, and it feels so good. And this is a great cause. It's real, and these are real people. So anything I can do to help. I'm now working and living in New Haven, Connecticut. I was in Osaka, Japan, working on Super Mario Brothers for Universal Studios when the COVID hit, and I had to come home because of the COVID. And I'm now here, and I feel a whole new world come alive. And with everything that's going on, I just want to be a part of it because it's real and I love it, and it needs to happen. So thank you for allowing me to be here tonight.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for finding us. And thank you everybody else for attending. On that beautiful, wonderful note, again, thank you. This is the first part of hopefully multiple conversations and multiple other events. Sarah and I are working on various public programming associated with the exhibition as well, including a performance commissioned by Hartford artist Marisa Williamson, potentially some other public programs digitally through Zoom, possibly a performance event outdoors. I'm just going to tease you here and there with some of the things that we're thinking of. Hopefully some of them stick. And thank you again so much to everybody else for coming. I personally appreciate it. And we will hopefully see your submissions soon. We will talk to you soon, and feel free to reach out. Again, the link in the chat, it has my email on there. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any other questions. But until then, have a lovely evening. Go get some food, go get some drink, go get some sleep, which is what I'm gonna do.
Great job.
Thank you for hosting us, Neil.
Of course, of course.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
Bye.
Thanks.